It's really my pleasure to have my friend here today. Because if you were there for the previous talks, I told you that I was just reaching out to people on Twitter because I was interested in what they were doing. I actually know Jaree, kind of. We talk a lot, and still waiting to meet. And I'm really, really happy that she accepted to come here and share a passion that we share, that is medical entomology. So if you don't know, or if you haven't read the flyer, MAJ Jaree Johnson is a board certified medical veterinary entomologist. She holds degrees in animal science, animal health and diseases, and medical entomology. Her role in the military is to research, track, and mitigate all medically important arthropod-borne diseases that can affect members of military service, not only in contingency environments, but also during humanitarian mission and in peacetime. So today she will describe the role of an entomologist in the Army and give a brief overview of her career and journey that lasted over 11 years. So thank you so much. And I'll ask everyone to mute their phones if I've allowed them to talk. And as well, I remind you that questions should be posted in the chat while Jaree is talking, and I will read them to her at the end. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Maureen, for the introduction. And as she mentioned, I am a medical veterinary entomologist for the U.S. Army. I'm going to talk to you all today about the role of entomology in the Army. However, quickly, before we get started, I would like to poll everyone just so that I have an idea as to who is in the audience. And so you should be able to see that. And so I'll give you a few minutes just to answer that for me. A few more haven't answered. All right, yep, still looking.
Wow, so diverse today.
Mm-hmm, very. And a few more seconds. All right, and so it appears that, you know, we have people from a diverse background, a little bit of everything, and so that's awesome. And it looks like at least 3 people for sure knew what medical entomologists did in the military or knew that we existed, and so that's awesome. All right, and so as I mentioned, again, I'm going to talk about the role of entomology in the Army. However, before I start, I need to express that what I talk about today are my views, and they do not necessarily reflect the U.S. Army or the Department of Defense. So I oftentimes get questions on how did I pick the field of entomology? How did I pick doing it in the Army? And my road to this profession was not straight. It had many bumps and hills and valleys and other things. But growing up, you know, I always wanted to play with critters. I love critters. I wanted to be a veterinarian. I collected any and everything possible. And my parents, they really facilitated and supported that effort. So for undergrad, I majored in animal science. I knew that I wanted to be a veterinarian, as I mentioned. However, because I did not have proper mentors, I didn't realize that I would have had to take a pre-vet route, which my institute did not have it, Prairie View A&M University in Texas. And so most of my formal training at that time was really on animal husbandry. It was also a little bit of veterinary technician work. I worked with livestock. I also worked with small domestic animals. And right as I was graduating, my major professor was really good friends with another veterinarian who had presented him with a research fellowship. They were looking for someone who was interested in going to Rhode Island and looking at Lyme disease in dogs. And I was presented with that opportunity. I took the research fellowship and I enrolled to do my master's at the University of Rhode Island in animal health and disease. And so while there, and even though my past training had afforded me the opportunity to understand ectoparasites, I understood a little bit of parasitology, especially as a technician having to do fecal floats. I understood heartworm and how those were transmitted, but I didn't realize the impact that these same organisms actually had on humans because I was only seeing it from an animal perspective. So while doing my studies in Rhode Island, I was given a summer opportunity with the Department of Environmental Management. It was to, one, earn a little bit of extra money on the side, because as you all know, research assistantships only pay so much. And it was an opportunity to do surveillance in Rhode Island. And at this time, this is when West Nile virus had come to the US. I was in Rhode Island from 2000 to 2002. And I was part of a surveillance effort to do trapping throughout all of Rhode Island. So not only was I being introduced to diseases that ticks were transmitting, I was also being introduced to diseases that mosquitoes were transmitting. Along those same lines, while doing surveillance, I'm learning how to do a mosquito identification. I'm learning about all the different diseases. I'm learning about using traps because, again, I'm like, how am I supposed to trap mosquitoes? Like, I'm learning all these new things for the first time. And while doing them, I think I was like a kid in the candy store. And so graduating, I moved back to Indiana to support my grandmother. She had surgery, and I took an internship with Clark Mosquito Control. So I was part of the insecticide resistance product development team. I spent most of the winter in Kissimmee, Florida, and I spent the summer in Schaumburg, Illinois. So you can imagine myself and two other interns, we're out, we're setting kiddie pools, we're in folks' backyards, we are infusing these different pools and different barrels with larvae. We're doing efficacy studies, we're doing all this fun stuff. And during the period where I am in Schaumburg, Illinois, one of the recruiters who had talked to us about medical entomology happened to walk into my workspace. And when I saw her again, it's like, okay, this must be somewhat of a sign. And I'm talking with my supervisors, and they were very supportive of military entomology, and they knew that I wanted to do a variety of things. So they said, you should go back to school and get a degree in medical entomology. So I did. I started looking at universities. They had a great connection with Michigan State University, so I applied and got another fellowship. And at this time, I am the graduate student president for GES, which is the Graduate Undergraduate Entomology Student Society. And our department chair, he said, hey, I need you to round up all the students. The Army wants to come tell you about entomology, and they have free pizza. So who doesn't like free pizza? So I round up everyone, and we further hear about entomology. And once I finished, once I graduated from Michigan State, I went back to Clark to do my postgraduate work. And I just kept festering in the back. It was like, I really loved entomology. I really loved mosquitoes. I really loved ticks. But at the same time, I love to travel, and I love to just see the world and do different things. I get bored really quick. And so as you'll find, as we go through this presentation, many of the jobs and many of the things I do are just not in one box. And if it has legs, whether it's an insect, whether it's animals, I get to actually do it. And so everything that I've been formally trained in, I'm actually doing in the last 11 years. And so I've been now doing this 11 years. I commissioned in 2009, and I have been having the time of my life. So as you look at some of the other reasons why people join the military or even just the Army, it's for a variety of reasons. But one of the things that I find even more interesting, and I think most people don't think about this, as a whole, less than 1% of the US citizens are actually in the military. For the Army, there are 60 to 62 of us in the Army. There's about 30 or so in the Navy and even less in the Air Force, maybe 15 entomologists. And so we represent an even smaller population of the demographics that are now supporting the warfighters. And so for me, as I decided to take the leap, I knew that I wanted to travel. I knew that I wanted to do something better for the support of my country. And I just what that was going to entail until I actually did it. And so with that being said, I have had assignments all over the world. My first assignment was in Japan. I've been stationed in Korea. I've also been stationed in Fort Hood, Texas, Maryland, and I'm now in Kenya. So what I plan to do is maybe just walk you all through some of the different roles and job opportunities that we do in the military, and then I'll also highlight some of the jobs that I have had. So one of the things that I want you all to look at, which I think is amazing, this is the places that I traveled pre-military. You know, I was able, and as you'll see, most of it has been in the Caribbean area, of course, the United States, many cities in the United States, Mexico, and then the dot way off to the right is supposed to represent Hawaii because it's way over in the Pacific somewhere. So I had a nice amount of opportunity to travel. But in the 11 years that I've been in the military, that has expanded. I did not include the same bubbles from the previous slide, but as you can see, I've traveled to a ton more places, and most of them were either in support of my actual job, doing a lot of collaborative work, or because I was in those areas, it was just a great opportunity to take leave or take personal time to really truly immerse myself in some of the other countries. And so you can see that my whole world has really opened up just by this opportunity alone. And one of the other things that is really nice about the military is that we move every 2 to 3 years. So with that being said, you truly get to see the world from a totally different perspective, especially if you were not able to do a lot of that traveling prior to the military. So some of our assignments, they range from operational to teaching to also research. And I have highlighted the ones that I have been privileged to perform in. So I'll go through each of these assignments, I'll show pictures, and I'll just kind of walk you through a little bit of the day in and out opportunities that I had. And so from an operational standpoint, these are going to be some of the units that are deployable. They are our preventive medicine field units. We also have roles in the hospital. We have roles at Public Health Center and Public Health Commands. And then we have opportunities to do senior leadership work. Some of those are going to be some of the joint assignments, and then staff positions, either in plans or logistics or operations. Then we have teaching opportunities, which is the Army Medical Department School, AMED Center and School, METC. This is in San Antonio. This is where most of, actually all of our medical training happens, not only for entomologists, but this is where we train our soldiers in different medical capacity. And now that METC is in San Antonio, we now have the opportunity to do a lot of joint work with the Navy. And then we have USUHS, which is our university research institute. And then we have research opportunities, which is where I currently am in Kenya. So when we look at some of the deployable field sites, as I mentioned, this is a preventive medicine detachment. We have active and reserve components. I've served as an executive officer and I served as a commander. My executive officer time was when I was stationed at Fort Hood, and my commander time was when I was stationed in Korea. And one of the biggest things we do, we are a team of 13. There's 2 officers, the commander and the executive officer, and then all of our soldiers are enlisted, and they are set up in teams of 3 to 4 personnel per team. And what we are enabled to do is we are fully deployable, we're fully mobile, and we usually would go out to an area prior to either a deployment or humanitarian effort or even field training exercises. And we would go out and do what we call a base camp assessment. So during this assessment, we are actually going to look at the entire area to ensure that our soldiers can perform there in whatever the capacity is, but we ensure that we understand what disease risks are there, especially for insects. We look at the environmental factors to make sure that there are not any type of toxins in the area. We definitely look at air quality to ensure that wherever the setup is, it's not in an area that have heavy pollution. And we also train in industrial hygiene, which we want to make sure people are breathing correctly. We want to make sure people are not in areas where there's high noise impact. And we have a little bit of a capability to do radiological sampling, especially given the nature of our work. And so as you'll see on this top right picture, that's a soldier and I, stationed at Fort Hood, we were participating in West Nile surveillance efforts. And so we were responsible for setting traps on our installation, which was Fort Hood. And once we collected all of our mosquitoes, we set CDC traps and we set rabbit traps. This is one of the processes that, as you'll see, if you're a civilian entomologist, mirrors the same thing. You know, we collect, we do our sorting, we identify, we trap, and then we map as well so that we can alert the installation, hey, there may be cases of West Nile here, so that they can do proper mitigation. And then in the bottom, what you'll see is we also do pesticide application. So I'm also a Department of Defense certified pesticide applicator, and we are fully outfitted with spray equipment where we can do large scale spray support, or we can do just small support with Department of Public Works. And so this is a picture of me doing a training for recalibrating our spray equipment to make sure that our soldiers are always very proficient on the work that we are enlisted to do. And so you'll see here, in addition to doing that base camp assessment, we have a full arsenal of entomology equipment. We have, as I mentioned, CDC light traps, we have rabbit traps, we have rapid tests for dengue and malaria and I think leash right now, and so some of these other tests. And we also have the capability to do water testing on the spot, water quality, and also air quality. But we're fully outfitted to be very mobile. And again, the biggest thing is our mission is to ensure that the warfighter, which we are warfighters as well, but those that are on the front line are enabled to stay healthy and fit to support the mission at hand. And so one of the biggest things that I really enjoy about this opportunity, as I mentioned, we get to do so much. And so the top left picture, we're doing water quality. We have a field exercise in the field, and we were training on potable water versus non-potable water. In the middle, that's a rattler snake. So we have our motor pool where all of our equipment is set up. And one of the units, they yelled out, hey, there's a rattler, where's PM? And I'm like, I'll do it. So I go and I run and I grab these snake tongs and I come over and I catch and release, because I don't like killing things except mosquitoes and ticks. But I catch and release the snake and I take it over to the line. As I felt like Steve Irwin, I was excited showing everyone the snake. And then on the right-hand side, you can see where we're setting rabbit traps, again, in the support for West Nile surveillance. The bottom left, we are testing some of our environmental equipment prior to going out to a field exercise. The bottom center is myself. We're now both majors. Amanda Klein, she was the entomologist for the hospital. There was a rodent issue. And so it took 2 entomologists to go set traps for rodents. And then as again, the picture of us doing calibration. And so just from this picture alone, you can see that not only does entomology come into play, but we are expected as entomologists to be very rounded in our efforts to include rodents, bats, snakes, and bugs, and everything else. So one of our other opportunities is Public Health Center or Command, and the different roles there, staff entomologists, project officers, you can be chief of environmental health, and also executive officer here. And most of the efforts that we do here are somewhat similar. However, This scale is usually more in a consultative role, although you will have the opportunity to participate in surveillance programs. But the biggest thing is for installations, we look at developing pest management plans because every installation, they have to have a way to combat or mitigate whatever the pest is. And so with this, every year we have a plan to say, well, if it's cockroaches and it's this many, this is how we mitigate. If it's field flies, if it's mosquitoes, how to respond. And that way everyone is doing it uniformly across all installations. And as mentioned for the other assignment, we also can conduct the same environmental type work. We continue to support humanitarian efforts, but this particular role, you work more or less with a lot of civilians, and so it has a little bit different flavor, but also they are located in different places. And so some of the work that I've had the opportunity to do working at a public health command and a public health center, the top left is we were responding with the Navy. There was dengue outbreak in the Marshall Islands, and we were asked to come and support. So during this time, there was not a full pest control program, and we helped them establish a pest control program. The picture right below it is me being very creative. I'm doing an efficacy test on pest tabs, which is a single-use tab that you can put in a hand can. And we wanted to see if we were going to set the group up with pest tabs, how many times they would have to use it, how well it would respond, and how often they would have to replenish using their pest tabs. And then the bottom left is me looking for anopheles and rice paddies in Japan. The top middle is a collection. We went to the jungle warfighting training area in Okinawa, Japan with the Navy. And this was some of the collection from right in the area where they're doing training. So as you can imagine, if we are already seeing breeding mosquitoes, once they turn into adults, that's now putting our soldiers at risk, especially if they're not wearing the proper preventive equipment or DEET and things of that nature. Right below that picture is me in the Marshall Islands showing some of the locals how to look for mosquito larvae, because one of the things when we do these humanitarian missions, we realize that being out in the community and doing education is really the key to help reduce and educate on these type of diseases. And so Nam Ning Ning, which is mosquito baby in Marshallese, is what I would say to the kids, come help me find Nam Ning Ning. And so we would go and look in all these water basins. And this was a way to educate the community because they need this type of water. They use this water not only to wash their clothes, but they use this water to do dishes. And you can't just tell them to pour out the water. So one of the things we were able to do was to help them cover them. We were able to procure material so that they can cover. That way it'll shield mosquitoes from laying eggs, but it allowed them to keep their water. And then the bottom picture, surprisingly, this one, you don't get the full appreciation for it. There is a small island in Marshall Island, and I was trying to find the name of it before I prepared this, and I drew a blank, but they have a sanctuary for sea turtles. Well, the sea turtles were in distress because there are crazy ants that get in their eyes and it makes them uncomfortable. So I was asked to go over and set bait stations for crazy ants to help the turtles be able to lay their eggs on this protected island. And then up top in the right, I'm doing community outreach. One of my good friends was a kindergarten teacher, and whenever she taught biology, she would ask me to come and give a talk. So I'm always doing, morphology and metamorphosis talk. And mosquitoes are always nice because you could talk about the male mosquito having plumose antennae and just kind of go through the characteristics. And then the one up under there, as you can see, we saw stray animals, we would stop them, collect ticks off of them and everything. And then in the bottom picture is an opportunity for me to serve as an instructor for another unit to ensure that they're proficient in being able to do the work that they do. And it keeps going on. And so here are another variety of different pictures, from insecticide resistant testing to more environmental outreach to supporting other nations to also doing joint work. And so I mean, I always get so excited to talk about all the fun stuff that I'm doing simply because we do so much and you get to do it with so many different people. And not only are we helping our warfighters, but oftentimes we're helping establish a lot of these pest control demands in other countries as well. As I mentioned, we do have teaching opportunities. I have not taught at either of these, but as I mentioned, one is in San Antonio and the other institution is here in Bethesda, Maryland. And so both of these provide an opportunity to teach and train some of our brightest and young minds, as well as those who want to return to school and get their further on, further their education and get their graduate degrees, especially at USHUs. And then we talk about research, which is the Walter Reed Army Institute of Research. Our headquarters is here in Silver Springs. We also have an institute in Thailand. We have the institute in Kenya, which is where I am located. And then we also have one in Georgia. And so here, my role in Walter Reed is we're looking at repellent development. For us, we are doing product testing. We are bringing on board insecticide resistance because as we see, that's something that's huge, not only in the military, but also in the civilian sector. We conduct vector surveillance and control because we are now a little bit forward deployed, if you will, but positioned so that we can also identify some of these other areas that our military personnel will be assigned to understand the risk there. Some of our rare labs, they also do rapid diagnostic development, and we're really getting into next gene sequencing and biosystematics and bioinformatics. That's, one of the big way forwards, especially for our program. And then obviously the malaria vaccine development and resistance and so forth. And so here is just a picture showing my staff, and then also, as I mentioned, enrichment and community enrichment, because I truly believe that the best way to support like any country when we are visiting or we are working in a lot of these places is through education. And so I oftentimes will try to go and visit a school. I'm asked to visit a school and talk about what we do. And that way they can take this information, the kids can take this information back to their families to help mitigate their own circumstances, especially with standing water in their yards and things of that nature. But I have a staff of 17 Kenyans in Africa. And as I mentioned, we are doing a multitude of things. One of our prizes right now is being able to get sandflies to feed on membranes. Typically sandflies would have to feed on animals, and we've had to do that. But one of my technicians has been able to crack the code with an infusion of a variety of things, and we're going to be publishing that work so that we now have sandflies that feed on membranes, so we don't have to worry about going through IACUC anymore, and we don't have to worry about the other laborious factors of maintaining lab animals. And so that's one big one for us. And as I mentioned, insecticide resistance, we're bringing that on board and just increasing our diagnostics. But our role here, as you will see, I'm the only U.S. Officer for entomology, and we have other officers in Kenya, as I mentioned, microbiology, infectious disease, and we all have various roles to supporting the way forward in research. And in terms of where our assignments are, as you can see, we are pretty much everywhere. From places in the US to overseas. And so we do a lot of collaborative work with other military, Navy and Air Force. We are really big on interagency work, CDC, and for example, me in Kenya, do work with KEMRI, Wellcome Trust, CDC, USAID. Most recently, when we just had this locust outbreak, the desert locust, I was asked to consult on that in Kenya, and then COVID happened, and so I haven't been able to continue and follow it. But as you can see, just from the military, we are really all over the place. And it has been, a great opportunity for me to serve my country and to also ensure that the warfighters are safe. I've been able to further build my resume. I'm looking at doing, another 9 years, which will put me at 20 years. And then my next plan is to start a blog and go do some video blogging and collecting and consulting. But nevertheless, I have had an amazing time in the military. I think I not only have grown professionally, but also personally, and I've met a lot of great people, and I've had a wealth of opportunity, and just wanted to, really share a little bit of what we do in the Army. And at this time, I think that is it. So I know there may not be many entomologists on the line. However, if you are interested in joining our team, our consultant, Colonel Mark Carter, that's his contact information, and our deputy consultant, that's his contact information. Feel free to give them a buzz, send them an email. We can talk to you about the opportunities. But again, I have been enjoying it. I've had the time of my life, and I wouldn't change a thing. And I really enjoy doing this. And so at this time, we'll go ahead and end the talk. And as Maureen had mentioned, if you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat box, and I'm ready to answer. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was really cool. Before I read the first question, just going back to your contacts that you're showing right now, for the potentially other entomologists that are there, do they need to be US citizen to reach out?
Yes, so US citizen, I know there is a program where if you're not a US citizen, you would come in to do, I think it's joint citizenship, it's MAVELI program. And so I can get information. They would be able to definitely give you information on that. But there are opportunities to then acquire your citizenship to be an entomologist, but just out the gate, yes, a US citizen.
Okay, cool. Because I see a few medical entomologists here, but that are not necessarily a US citizen. Okay, so there is quite a long question here from Philip. Okay. Yeah, you can even open the chat if you want to read it as well. But he's saying, I would assume that all these activities are associated with procedures leading to some standardization of the data and material retrieval. Is it part, oops, it's moving. Okay. Is it part of the study of your duty to elaborate new procedures, also to evaluate whether these are applicable worldwide with or without adaptation? Do you have opportunities to share best practices with civil academics?
So I can't see the question here. I was trying to,
You have to open the chat.
Oh, there we go. All right. Yeah, it is a long one. All right. So Philip, to answer your question, yes, so there is a standardization, and that's one big one, especially when we do work with civilian entities. And oftentimes the work that we do, especially when it comes to surveillance, that's going to be typically standardized. We share our best practices with a lot of mosquito abatement for control companies. And we have annual meetings, especially like ESA, that we will go and present at SOVE, also ASTMH. And so all of these civilian meetings, we do present our work. We are, as I mentioned, given the opportunity to do collaborative work so that if there are best practices that are being discovered in the civilian world, we are open to bringing those into our form as well, and vice versa. And so through the interagencies collaborations that we have, we definitely are trying to make sure that the information is shared. When we do work with CDC, we share our work with them. You know, for example, one is DNA barcoding. That one is with the Smithsonian. And so that was a collaboration from military personnel to also civilian to ensure that you can go online and look at the keys. And so, yes, there's a lot of activities that allow us to standardize, if I answered the question correctly.
Okay, I have a question from Amanda. That's quite a cool question. Do flies sleep? And if so, when? Also, why do they rub their eyes?
Awesome. And so flies, yes, they do sleep. in a weird way, because they're not necessarily diurnal, they're not necessarily nocturnal because you see them all the time, but well, actually they're not nocturnal because they're out mostly in the daytime. But yes, they do sleep in the evening. I've never seen it on record actually. However, they do sleep. And when they rub their eyes, they are actually grooming themselves. They're tasting because they have these pads on their feet. And so they're tasting the air, they're tasting from their antennae, and they're just also clearing the 100 of eyes that they have, if that answers the question.
Yeah. The last question, is for me. Could you maybe share a bit of the research that you're currently conducting in Kenya?
Yeah, absolutely. And so right now we have efforts with various institutions. So we're doing spatial repellent testing for North Carolina State University and also USDA. They have proprietary products that they asked us to test our local colonies, sandflies, and also mosquitoes on for them, so that they not only could show how the work or how the species in Africa survive or not survive to these products, and also the ones to the US. And so we do a lot of product testing for other companies. We are also doing surveillance efforts for the geographic combatant commanders. And these are the folks that are pushing the different warfighters to various parts of the world. And so with our surveillance efforts, we're able to, as I mentioned, be the first on the ground to identify the risk. We're able to put that information together and provide the recommendations to the geographic combatant commander, so he or she knows when they send their troops out, these are some of the areas that they need to be more concerned with. And so that's a really big role. And then we're also now looking at pesticide resistance, because one of the things that we are finding is if we make recommendations in terms of, okay, this area is high risk, how can you mitigate it? And if you try to mitigate it and your control strategies are not working, could that then be due to some type of pesticide resistance? And so we're coupling pathogen testing, arthropod surveillance detection with pesticide resistance, so that we can paint the entire picture to the person that's going to do the mitigation, to the folks that are going to be in those hot areas, so that they can better prepare themselves. So that's the bulk of our work right now. And we are expanding into doing tick work, which we're going to be trying to work with you to do tick work on as well, with the Wellcome Trust. And so that's something that we haven't done. Well, they've done it a long time ago, but we're trying to just, revamp that, because ticks are often not looked at as much because they are laborious. And so I'm excited about that future work. But yeah, that's a few of the things we're doing right now.
Promise I didn't ask you that so you could mention me, but it was really not my goal. Anyways, another question from Mark Carter. He's asking, what has been your most challenging assignment?
I would actually say this assignment right now is my most challenging. Well, it's only because it's a different dynamic. I'm working, I'm the only military officer in terms of in my program, whereas in the past I've had soldiers to work with, and so I'm working with literally all civilian, and I don't get to get out and do as much of the field work as I would like, and just trying to ensure that we are doing the research that is important for the warfighter while also supporting the country that we are in. And so it's been challenging for me only because I like to be in the field and I want to be out there. And so I'm having to reel myself back in and realize that I'm a leader and I'm having to be a supervisor and a manager to some sort. And so that's why it's challenging for me, is because I want to play more.
Cool. So there is another question from Kristen Dubo, but she's actually sharing a question from Seb. He's 14 years old. And he's asking, are there plans for the military to use technology like a gene drive against mosquitoes? Well, it's just a question for someone who is 14.
Gene drive. I don't know that one. Is that like, can you elaborate, Kristen? Can we give her talking rights?
Let me unmute you. Where are you? Up, up, up. Yeah, you're allowed to talk now, so you can unmute yourself and elaborate on your question.
Yeah, Kristen, elaborate on that for me. Gene drive.
Oh, sorry, that was from my son, and he was suggesting, I think there were some studies maybe in South America where they're using genetic modification to insert, a gene and then propel that through many generations through the mosquitoes so that they stop breeding or are kind of mitigated.
Okay. Yep. And so I know there is work ongoing to look at male sterilization, kind of like what was done with screw worms, because they are both, part of the order of Diptera. And so there is current work looking at male sterilization. In terms of the military doing it, I can't confirm or deny because it is something that's relatively new, but I know for sure that it's happening on the civilian side. And depending on how the outcome of those play into part, again, because we do collaborations with a lot of civilian entities, I'm sure we would benefit from it even if we did not take it on as a full responsibility ourselves. But it is a technology, anything that we can use to protect the warfighter, we are definitely open to looking into it for sure.
Does that answer your question, Kristen?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
So you mentioned screw worms. That is just the greatest story of vector control. And I'm like, I don't know if everyone here knows it. So would you mind sharing it? Because it's just too fantastic.
Yes, so I don't know as much about it, but I know enough about it. And so one of the ways to kind of reduce the population of any species, I guess, is through sterilization. And in this case, they were irradiated. The male flies were irradiated so that their sperm would not necessarily be viable. And they still would mate, but in lack of better terms, they would draw blanks, if you will. And so they would mate, draw blanks, and the female fly just would never get pregnant. And female flies could still have, lay eggs and everything, but they were just never viable. And so that is one way and that's how they were able to eradicate the screwworms. We have seen that in recent times, they have come back, especially in Florida, and I think they're trying to do that same procedure. And so they are thinking, because they both fall in the order of Diptera, this is something that could be done with male mosquitoes, because as you all know, the female is inseminated once. She has the spermatheca. Once the male implants the spermatheca, she's pregnant for life. So the thought is, if they can sterilize male mosquitoes, this will be the same concept. They'll still mate, but the spermatheca would be inactivated and the eggs would never fully be formed from the female mosquito. And this is one way to reduce mosquito populations.
Okay. So for non-medical entomologist nerds, screwworm is actually the offspring of a fly that will lay egg on an animal generally, and the larvae will just bury and eat your skin. So you would find animals with huge lesions because of those screwworm like multiplying and eating their skin. And what I found really amazing about it is, so they had this problem because they eliminated it from the US, but US has a frontier with Mexico, and there would still be an introduction of screwworms. So what they did is, after they eliminated it from the US, they started breeding screwworms. So there are factories in the US where they are multiplying sterilized screwworms, and then you have every week until now a shipment, planes that go over the border, Mexican border, and they just put worms everywhere to also sterilize the worm over the border. So, and it's fantastic because I can't even remember since when this has been eradicated in the US, but since that day, many years ago, they still ship worms every week, millions of worms. It's just a bit crazy. I find it like very exciting, but maybe that I'm a bit biased. Sorry. So another question. How do we sterilize a mosquito population without threatening the entire population? I don't know if it's too specific for a question. I don't think so.
No, it's not too specific. So at the same time, remember that, well, I won't say remember that. So mosquitoes, species, they're going to breed with their own species. And so this would be a targeted approach where they would really focus on the mosquitoes that are known to be really medically important, you know, Aedes aegypti, maybe Aedes albopictus, some of the ones that we know transmit diseases. And so the plan would not necessarily, and again, I'm postulating here, the plan would not necessarily be to make all mosquitoes sterile. It would be to focus on the ones that we know are of medical importance. And so therefore, there's plenty of other mosquitoes out there that don't necessarily transmit diseases. And this would just be a small snapshot, because you also have to realize that mosquito breeding habitats are everywhere. And so we won't necessarily be able to fully get rid of all the mosquitoes, because their breeding process is totally different from flies. And it's just really hard, but it is a way to at least reduce the number of some of these medically important mosquitoes, if that answers your question.
If it doesn't, please say so. I'll just go to the next one, which is from Fatlin Aisela. Is from the University of Ghana. He's a medical entomology student, and he's saying, "Thank you, Jaree, for the excellent presentation. I would like to know the measures you take to protect the warfighters against arthropod pests while in the battlefield."
Yes, and so our uniforms are now treated. So that has been a great step forward, because in the past, the uniforms, you would have to treat them yourself with a permethrin. You would have to reapply it, especially after washing it so many times. And then what we have is the total personal protection, all the acronyms, total personal protection campaign that we pushed, which was wear your uniform correctly. So the way we wear our pants, they're tucked into our boots, our sleeves are long. We also recommend that you put DEET on any of the exposed skin. And then if you treat your uniforms, this is prior to our uniforms being treated, we would say to, you know, spray it with some type of DEET or spray it with permethrin and then reapply. So it's really based on the messaging, ensuring that the total person is protected. With that messaging, it then relies on those soldiers' leadership to enforce it. And so when they're in the field, it would be the leader's responsibility to make sure that, hey, when we're doing certain work, you keep your jacket on, because sometimes it gets hot. And during that time, people may want to take their blouse off, but they may not have put on DEET on the other exposed part of their skin. And so it's really through that campaign. And now that our uniforms are treated, it took at least that step out. However, we do have to always remind those to treat their exposed skin areas. But so that's the personal protection method that we use. As I mentioned earlier, when we're out doing surveillance and we're collecting the information, we're identifying what the arthropod vector is, we're identifying the diseases that they have, we're building maps, risk maps, and that information is also shared with the leadership, so that when they send their personnel to those areas, they already understand the risk before going into those areas.
I have a last one. So you guys, if you have questions, this is the time. I guess that all your troops come with, when they come here at least, with prophylaxis for malaria. Is it common as well to get prophylaxis for tick-borne diseases? Like, are they on doxycycline or something like that?
So typically we don't do chemoprophylaxis for tick issues, but if there are those who find a tick and it's been engorged, you know, mostly we give the 24-hour spill, they will then be assigned, prescribed doxycycline.
Okay.
But nothing to take ahead of time like we do for malaria, where you can have them take doxy or Malarone or some of these other ones ahead of time for the pre-exposure. And as you know, even with doxy, because a lot of the side effects as well, it's just easier to wait for an engorgement, if you will, before we would prescribe any type of prescribed medicine for tick-borne issues.
It's very common actually in France that people are only prescribed doxycycline because then it covers everything, but then you have to have the load of sunscreen because you get so red. It's just awful. But yeah, apart from them, it's still fine. Okay,
Yeah.
so no more questions. Just checking if I get anyone.
And if you want, can you unmute Colonel Carter? I don't know if he wants to say anything. He's our consultant, and I see that he's called in.
Yeah, join. Yeah, hello to talk.
Just in case. Sir, I know I'm putting you on the spot.
Hi, Jaree. Great job. Absolutely phenomenal. For those on the line, if you are interested in a career in medical entomology in the armed forces, you can send me an email and I will send you some material, a PDF that basically talks about the requirements, the education requirements, and the citizenship requirements. Other than that, Jaree, absolutely phenomenal job. Thank you for doing this today.
No, thank you for being online as well.
All right. Okay, so I think we're done with all the questions. I don't think I've missed anyone. If I've missed your question, please raise your hand. No. Okay. So thank you so much. It was such fun. I had no doubt. So thank you so much, and thank you everyone for being here. So I remind you that this is recorded. So unless Jaree decides to say otherwise, this will be on YouTube in a week. Okay. Thank you so much, and see you next week, I guess. Thank you, sis.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.